Greetings and welcome. We are in Junior English, and we now turn in your hymnals to page 110, 111, and following to give some small amount of energies and time to one of the greatest texts ever written. Now I'm going to make some what will sound like outlandish or hyperbolic or exaggerated statements at the very beginning. And I hope that you don't, at the end of my lecture, still feel that I'm engaging in exaggeration or hyperbole. Because the truth of the matter is, I believe that the Declaration of Independence is one of the single most influential texts ever penned. I'm going to try and make that argument, but I'm actually going to start with some introductory comments on Thomas Jefferson himself. You see information there on him on page 111. No introduction will ever do enough, really, to explain this amazing human being. For example, just read with me on page 111 really quickly about this cat. The author, or co-author, we sometimes have to say, of course, co-author of the Declaration of Independence. Notice when we look at all of Jefferson's achievements, it seems almost nothing was beyond his reach. Take a look at some of this stuff, and some of this you're going to want to write down maybe. Not only did he help our nation win its independence, serve as its third president, founded the University of Virginia, helped establish the public school system, designed his own home, invented a type of elevator for sending food from floor to floor, created the decimal system for the American money. As if that's not enough, keep reading. Skilled violinist, art enthusiast, brilliant writer. One of my favorite stories in this regards is once one of our great presidents, John F. Kennedy, had together in the Oval Office there a number of winners of Nobel Prizes. And he said in his comments, "There's never been a gathering of brilliant minds like this, with the exception of when Tom Jefferson had two of his friends over for an evening meal." This was Kennedy's attempt to try to say that Jefferson was this brilliant, brilliant mind who came into history at a pivotal moment. Well, what was that moment? And what is this document that we call the Declaration of Independence? I think I said in an earlier lecture what I'll reiterate, and that is, I am convinced that young people in America today, if they lack patriotism, and I'm not certain that you do, but if you lack patriotism, I think the primary reason is that not enough attention has been paid to give you any reason to have patriotism. That is to say, I don't know that enough has been said about good reasons to be patriotic. And by the end of your time of studying the Declaration of Independence, you inevitably, I hope, will at least find yourself saying, wow, what an amazing mind to create the language that we will call the Declaration of Independence. Now, the place we're actually going to start is two places with the DOI. The first is actually going to be 2B. We're going to spend some time talking about the rhetorical techniques of this, what we will call persuasive essay. So I'm going to begin by talking about persuasion. What makes good persuasion? And then we'll be able to turn to the Declaration of Independence, not only as a historical document, but as a literary document, where we will analyze literarily what it is that Jefferson pulls off in this remarkable essay. Of course, the other thing we got to talk about, we already started talking about, is the history behind this document. Jefferson and the colonialists clearly have a very demanding choice. Maintain status quo and allow England to continue to do what England is doing, especially George III. Or declare independence, as we were saying in an earlier word picture from an earlier session. Tell your parents it's time for you to leave. It's time for you to turn over the house, the keys to the car, and everything else to me. And you leave, as if that's bad enough or challenging enough. But then to say on top of it to your parents, or to the people who you're throwing out of the house who are adults, you now must consider me from this point on your political equal. That is even maybe more remarkable. And so Jefferson and his pals, they clearly had their back up against the wall when Jefferson said, let's do this thing. Let's declare our independence. And there were a lot of colonialists who did not early on support this decision because they knew the dangerous threat. They understood what potentially could be lost. And so Jefferson had to make the argument. That is what this essay is. Two things. One, it is an essay. Two, it is a persuasive essay. Now, I know that on page 110, your textbook is trying to give you some sense of what makes good persuasion. I'm going to add to the information of page 110. Let's go ahead now and give a brief observation, series of observations about what makes good persuasion. If you are going to write good persuasion, if you are going to engage in good persuasion, then it makes sense that you study the very best of models. And in my estimation, the Declaration of Independence is hands down the best example that I can give to you of persuasion. Let's define persuasion and the key elements that make good persuasion. One, defining persuasion. To define persuasion, we have to make sure that we understand which C word we're talking about. C word. What do you mean C word? Well, often students will say or think that persuasion is I'm trying to change your mind. That's the first C word, change. To change your mind or change your opinion. But if you'll think about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? So, for example, I believe that all abortions are wrong. I'm going to write an essay. That essay gets read, and there will be no more abortions in the world. No, see, that's not the way it works. You don't change people's minds and opinions so easily. Psychologists will tell us, in fact, that people can say their minds have been changed, but then come back and visit them 10 years later, and let's see if their minds really were changed. You don't change people's minds so easily. So what is persuasion really? We are not changing opinions, but write down the second C word, way more important. We are challenging opinions. To challenge an opinion means that the individual will listen and then decide whether the argument has some merit. You're not changing his or her mind, you're challenging his or her opinions or attitudes. That's what good persuasion does. Now, you're probably familiar with people who write in the newspaper about their latest beef, and they basically go on and on and on about how upset they are about not having proper parking at the golf course or whatever it is. All right? But that's not what we call persuasion. That's what we call opinion writing or editorial writing. You want to put those two terms in your notes, as opposed to persuasion. Opinion writing or editorial writing is to basically say what your view is, and you really do not care about what your readers' views are. Doesn't matter to you, okay? But that is not persuasion. Persuasion is something fundamentally different. Persuasion will do something that we call assuming the acrimonious audience. Assuming the acrimonious audience. Now we know what assume. To assume means that you kind of guess in advance. What does the term acrimonious mean? Well, acrid, related to acid. In other words, do you think an acrimonious audience is an audience that agrees with what you're saying or disagrees with what you're saying? Right, they disagree with what you're saying. So when you write persuasion, you work off of the assumption that your reader will not agree with you. See, notice how different that is from editorial writing, where when the person writing basically is writing for other people who agree with him or her. And the people who don't agree with him or her, well, I really don't care what you have to say because I'm right and you're wrong. That's editorial writing. That's opinion writing. That is not persuasion. Persuasion assumes the acrimonious audience. We are writing to people who will not agree with our position, or we are speaking to people who will not agree with our position. Because that's the case, and we assume the acrimonious audience, there's two things that good persuasion then always will do. And this you definitely want to write down. Two things that the audience of the acrimonious audience, two ways to reach that audience we always will be doing in our writing and in our speaking if we're going to be doing proper persuasion. Right? And why is that? Well, think about this for a moment. I'm having a conversation with one of you, and all of a sudden I will say something. I'll just say here, Miss Castor. So I'm saying this could never happen, by the way. So I say something to Miss Castor, and she goes like this: "You are a jerk! I can't believe you just said that to me." And she gets up and she just walks out of the room, and I go, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa! I realize I just offended her. I need to go and talk to her. And so I run out down the hall and I say, whoa, wait, Miss Castro, wait. And she goes, no, you're a jerk. I am never talking to you again. And I say, I think you thought I said X. And she goes, I know that's what you said. And I said, I didn't say X. I actually said Y. You thought I said X, but I actually said Y. Can I explain myself? And she goes, oh, I thought you said X. And I go, I know. That's what you thought I said, but that's not really what I said. What I said was Y. And she goes, oh. See, you could do that when you're having public discourse. Would you agree with me? When you're having dialogue, when you're having conversation, you can do that. But if I write something that Miss Castor picks up and she starts reading, the minute she stops reading because she doesn't agree with what I've said or like what I've said, and she puts the paper down, until somebody can figure out paper that says, hey, pick me up, keep reading, there's more information that's going to go. No, it doesn't work that way. In other words, for your notes, this is hypercritical for you to understand. The minute the reader stops reading, you are no longer persuading. What I just said is so important. I'll say it again so you can be sure and write it down. Because this is the key to persuasion. You as the writer must keep the reader reading. Okay? And what reader? Well, we've said it already. The acrimonious reader. The reader that's not going to agree with you. Who's actually going to probably disagree with you. And your job in persuasion, again, is to challenge his or her, reader, opinions. To do that, the only way you can do that is to keep the reader reading. How are you going to keep the reader reading? Two things you'll want to write down. I mean, there's a number that we can point out, but two things for sure. One, what we will call the consideration of the historical precedent. The consideration of the historical precedent. Now we know what it means to consider. That means to think about or to give time to thinking about. Historical, we know what that means. Not in the future, but in the past. Correct? Historical. But what is this word precedent? Are you at all familiar in legal terms? So for example, if a trial happens in front of a judge and the judge asks, is there a precedent in this case? What does that mean? That means some ruling that came before. Some ruling that came before. When you consider the historical precedent, all that means is you consider what other people have had to say on the topic before you. I'll say it again. The consideration of the historical precedent simply assumes or concerns itself with what have other people had to say about this topic. That is the word research. Write it down. Good persuasion begins with research. What has been said on both sides of the argument? The argument then begins as an arguable thesis. Write that down. An arguable thesis. What do we mean by that? Well, you are writing about something on which, a topic on which there is opinion on both sides of the argument. It gets dark at night is not an arguable thesis unless you're on some serious LSD. Okay? However, when you're writing persuasion, you're writing on an arguable thesis. There are both sides. Good persuasion assumes research for both sides. Taking into consideration the historical precedent means, what have other people had to say on this topic other than me? Okay? Now this is critical to understanding good persuasion. No matter how academic the writer will always begin with good persuasion, referencing somebody else. I can always tell, for example, if I'm lecturing a group of university students, who my upperclassmen are versus my younger students. All I have to do, for example, is ask a question like, what's the best form of government? My freshmen will jump right into it immediately. The best form of government is a democracy because we live in a democracy and all other forms. No, that's freshman. An upperclass, like a graduate level student, will hear the question, what's the best form of government? And they'll always respond the same way. It's a very interesting question. Where would you like for us to begin answering that question? First of all, we can talk about the word best. How you want to define the word best. You're talking pragmatic, most effective? Are you talking about... What about form? What do you mean by form? Governmental forms. We could begin, of course, with Plato's Republic if you'd like, and we could talk about his four forms of government. Of course, in Plato's view, democracy ends as the descension of governmental decline, not the ascension. And then, of course, what do you mean by the word government? Would you like to begin with, for example, Jeffersonian view of government? Would you like to talk about Karl Marx and his understanding of government? What do you mean when you use the term government? In other words, the graduate level student is letting me know there are multiple perspectives to this topic. What's the best form of government? Where would you like to begin? Freshmen, who often are uneducated, they'll just jump right in and tell you what they think. When you're writing Persuasion, research is the key. And the older you get as a writer, and the more mature you become as a writer, you will recognize the value of considering the historical precedent. Why? Because you want your acrimonious reader to at least know that you have given proper time and consideration to both sides of the argument. If you are going to write that you believe that abortion is wrong and not right, it's still incumbent upon you to do research on why people believe abortion should be allowed. But I don't believe it. You're not hearing me. This has got nothing to do with what you believe. This is called seeing multiple perspectives. You want to write that down. A good writer of persuasion can see multiple perspectives, can see multiple sides to an issue. Okay? And the way that you can prove to your reader that you have considered multiple sides is by citing, C-I-T-E, or quoting, right, from historical sources, from stuff from the past. In other words, one of the things I want to say to you now that's crucial is, from this point on in your writing career, when you are going to write persuasively, you always want to begin by asking the simple question, what has been said on this topic before me? What have other people had to say on this topic? We want to begin there always. Okay? And then, using that information, we can construct our persuasive argument. All right? So we're going to consider the historical precedent. It's one of the ways to show that we're fair-minded, that we've considered both sides of the argument. That's the first thing. The second thing we're always going to do when we write persuasion is what we call conceding a point. Conceding a point. Now what does that mean? Well, this could never happen for Whirling Warrior programs, athletic programs, but what would it mean if in the middle of the contest your team is getting slaughtered so bad that your team concedes the game? What does it mean to concede? It means to give up, to acquiesce, okay? So conceding a point means what in argument? It means you say something the other side, the acrimonious audience, is going to agree with. Write that down. That's our definition. You're going to say something the other side, the acrimonious audience, will agree with. However, you always follow concession of a point with the word but, or so, or however. Right? Now, you sometimes see this at Worland High because boys are just stupid and girls are smarter. Let's just say it out loud. So the poor boy, he just doesn't know. When the girl says to the boyfriend, "We've been dating a long time, haven't we?" Now the poor guy, he's got no clue what's about to come. And so he goes, yeah. And of course we know what the next thing is going to be. But I think it's time we should probably just be friends and date other people. He never saw it coming. He of course agreed with the girl when she said, "We've been friends for a long time and been dating for a long time." He had no idea that his agreeing was going to set him up for the next comment, which is, of course, going to be the knockdown argument. I think it's time we probably should go ahead and separate and go our separate ways. And the guy never saw it coming. Of course, you all use this when, for example, you set up maybe somebody in your house. "Ma, you look really nice today." And the mom immediately responds, "Yeah, no, it's not going to happen." What do you mean it's not going to happen? I never even got around to being able to... No, I knew where you were going with that. You're trying to say something to quote-unquote butter me up. That phrase, butter me up, is called conceding a point. In other words, you say something the acrimonious audience will agree with, and then you immediately follow that up with something they probably won't agree with. Years ago, I gave an assignment to a group of college writers that really upset them. I said, "I want you to write a persuasive essay, and the thesis, the topic will be, war is good." That's your topic. Your audience are a group of peace activists chained to fences outside of a Nevada test site, weapons test site. Those people, your audience. And your thesis is, war is good, ready, go. And you got to write a persuasive essay where they keep reading. They keep reading. And they came back and said, well, that's impossible. The minute I tell a bunch of peace activists war is good, they're going to put the paper down and stop reading. They're not going to see this as persuasion. It's an impossible activity. How to approach it. I said, well, what about language? Let's think about the way you use language. For example, let's not say war is good, but let's start out by saying war is terrible. First line of the essay, war is horrific. Lots of people die. Economies can often be destroyed. Families torn asunder. Lots of terrible things happen because of war. However, sometimes war is necessary. Right? Think about subtly, rhetorically, what we've done. First of all, we concede a point, don't we? Right? We also consider historical precedent. We say it out loud. War has, in the history of the world, been terrible. Lots of terrible things have happened. The acrimonious audience reading will agree outright. Of course they agree. However, sometimes war is necessary. Now notice, I'm not trying to change the opinions of those people chained to that fence. What I'm trying to get them to do is to go, yeah, maybe. All right, I'll hear what you got to say. And then all you got to do is look at history and say, is there a time in history when the only way to stop a bad guy was through war? The only way. Because the bad guy was going to keep going until somebody put a bullet in him and the people who supported him. Is there a time in history I can find when that actually is the case? Yeah, maybe one or two. See how that works? And now all of a sudden I'm using research, I'm citing historical moments to try to make my argument. Finally, presentation of validation. When we write, we always will validate our thesis. That means to prove. How we present our validation is always up for debate. For example, do we begin with our strongest argument first and then go to our weakest arguments? Or do we begin with our weakest arguments and move towards our strongest argument? Most persuasive writers will argue it makes more sense to do the latter. Begin with your weaker arguments first. The acrimonious audience will read, will say, yeah, I get what you're saying, however, I got this answer to come back to you, and so keep reading. And then finally lead the acrimonious audience to your final point, which is what you would maybe think of as your knockdown argument point, your best argument. Okay? An introduction to persuasion. Because here's the deal. Persuasion is like if there was a piece of carpet up here, and I couldn't step off the carpet, but I needed you to get onto the carpet. I put my linguistic hand out to you and say, grab a hold of my hand and I'll pull you to the carpet. I can't leave my place on the carpet. That's what you're doing in your writing persuasion. You are inviting the acrimonious reader to hear what you have to say. The only way that's going to happen is if you show that you are fair-minded, if you are balanced in your opinion, if you've considered both sides. You don't just research then the side for your side, you also research the other side, and you use data and research from the other side to show that you've really kind of thought the argument through. An introduction to persuasion. Well, is there an example of an essay that I can show to you which does these very things? That in fact is a classic example of persuasion in every sense of the language that I've been using. I think there is. And I think it's the Declaration of Independence. So let's now turn to it. Of course, we've spoken already about the rhetorical techniques of persuasion. Let's remind ourselves about the political historical dynamics as we get ready to talk about this Declaration of Independence. Notice the information that they will call background on page 112. Notice I'm reading with you. The year, you'll write it down obviously, 1776. By the way, it's a fascinating reality to think about the end of Jefferson's biography. If you'll flip back for just a second to page 111, under valued statesman, we already know about him as revolutionary leader. Obviously, he is going to write the most famous words of the American Revolution. But look at what they say about valued statesman. In the last paragraph, on the morning, are you ready for this? And some of my students have said, this is the coolest fact of all of history, in American history. On the morning of July the 4th, 1826, I hope you're reading it with me. On the morning of July the 4th, 1826, 50 years to the date since the Declaration of Independence had been signed, Thomas Jefferson dies. 50 years to the date, Thomas Jefferson's best friend, John Adams, the one who helped him write the Declaration, and the one who was so important in his life, dies a few hours later. John Adams' final words, the last words on page 111, are, Thomas Jefferson still survives. Interestingly, before Jefferson died, right before he died, he freed all of his slaves, which is interesting, and it becomes, of course, a very enigmatic question. A, how is it possible that the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence owned slaves all his life? And B, why would he decide to free them right before he died? But he did free them. The other really interesting thing about Jefferson is that at his death, he said that the thing he hoped he would be remembered for the most, 50 years after the writing of the Declaration of Independence, was not the DOI, but rather the founding of the University of Virginia. Jefferson was very proud of the fact that he founded an institution of higher learning, which in many ways was the first modern university, a place where you would go to develop skill sets for any number of occupations other than going into law or religion, clergy. And for Jefferson, he saw this, the University of Virginia, as his single greatest contribution that he was most proud of. Of course, we today have a tendency to say, yeah, the U of V is a great school and all, but dude, you helped write the Declaration of Independence, the greatest single persuasive essay ever written. Let's go ahead and look now at this document on page 112. I'm back to the background information. 1776, Tom Jefferson was chosen, along with Franklin, Adams, and others, to write a declaration of the colonists' independence from England. The draft presented to the Second Continental Congress was largely Jefferson's work. To his disappointment, however, Congress made changes before approving the document. They dropped Jefferson's condemnation of the British for tolerating a corrupt parliament, and they struck out a strong statement against slavery, which is fascinating to think of, right? So Jefferson himself, right, is going to have his own work edited, and we now are going to turn to this classic essay, the Declaration of Independence. Let's go ahead now. We'll begin to work through these lines. We are working right now at level 1. We'll also be jumping between level 1 and, of course, level 2. Let's take a look at how he begins. Just to remind, Jefferson's goal is simple. He is going to make the argument that England now must leave, that the English colonies now must consider themselves American colonies. He is telling mom and dad, leave the house and everything in it. It all belongs to us, and we now are your equals. We no longer wish to be subjects. We will be equals with you. This is, of course, an impossible task, and look at where Jefferson starts. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Now, I should point out two things about the language of Jefferson. One, he's educated. Okay? He's educated. Two, he's a lawyer. And so when he begins to write, it will not shock you, for example, that his first paragraph is just one sentence. Right? And it's going to be a somewhat convoluted sentence, one that we're going to have to break down by parenthetical phrases, and at level 1, we're literally going to put it in our own words. One of the ways I've taught the DOI, and it's a good way to learn it, is to draw a line down the center of the page. On the left-hand side, you put the actual words of Jefferson, word for word, and on the right-hand side, you just put what it means. You put it in your own words. It's a great way to learn the Declaration of Independence, to try and understand exactly what he's saying. Let's do it really quickly with the first paragraph, just to get a sense of it, all right? Notice, when in the course of human events, what does that mean? Can you put that in your own words? When in the course of human events, well, let's say it out loud. He's considering the historical precedent. He's asking, has there ever been a time in history when a subjugated people, colonialists, have decided to rebel and declare their independence against the mother country? Right? Has there ever been a time in history when a people who were smaller and weaker have decided to say to a much more powerful government, it's time for you to go. Leave us alone. Has that ever happened? Jefferson will say, it has happened. When it has happened, when in the course of human events, it becomes, there's the key word. It's one we want to write down in our notes. The argument for Jefferson is, what we are about to do in declaring our independence is necessary. Write that word down and define it for yourself. What does that word mean to you? Necessary means what? We do not have a choice. That will be central to understanding the DOI, the essay here of Persuasion. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for what? One people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. Now it's interesting that Jefferson uses the word band. Some of you will write that word down. Here's why. In slave culture, it's very tragic, but I'll say it out loud. In slave culture, the slaves who were about to be purchased were brought up on scaffolding naked. The people who were going to buy them had to see them physically, and so they were brought up naked. There was then the opportunity to examine the slave you were about to purchase. You literally could walk up, you could require to look in the mouth and any other body parts. You examined the slave you were about to buy, and then you purchased the slave. When you bought the slave's hands were tied with leather, and then there was a big bucket of water right off the scaffolding that the slave was required to put his or her hands into. Why? What do you know about what leather does when it gets wet? Right. Shrinks, doesn't it? Those leather thongs were called bands. So there's an interesting word picture here. Jefferson is going to argue that the colonialists have been treated like slaves. You heard this in an earlier text by Patrick Henry, didn't you? Right? The idea of slavery as being central to the way that the British are treating the colonialists. In other words, we're going to break or to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. Of course, in this case, we're talking about the colonialists and the English. And to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station. It's not enough to tell your parents you're leaving the house and I'm keeping everything. You're also telling them, I am your separate and your, the E word, equal. I've had students that say, of all the things that would probably offend my ma the most, it wouldn't be throwing her out of her own house and keeping all her stuff. It wouldn't be saying that I'm living without you, separate. It would be that last word. That would be the one that would sting her the most. When I said to her, you're no longer my mother, we are now equals. And I will never think of you as my mother again. I will never see you as somebody above me. I will forever see you as equal. That is what Jefferson says is going to happen. So notice, see, we're unpacking the line, then we go back and put it back together. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them to another, yes, and to assume among the powers of the earth that separate and equal station to which, look at the next parenthetic, to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. Now look, think back to my word picture. You're sitting there talking with your folks and you say, it's time for you to leave, I'm taking over. Don't you think at some point they would ask this question, what gives you the, what's the next word? Right. Yeah, that's it. What gives you the right to throw us out of our own house and take over? What gives you that right? Notice Jefferson will answer, what gives us the right? Did you see it? It's two things. The laws, I hope you're writing it down, the laws of nature and nature's God. Now, there's been a lot written on this notion of the laws of nature and what he means by that, and the idea of natural rights. Okay. Who is nature's God? Now, this is brilliant on Jefferson's part. He could have said the Catholic God, and then all the Protestants would have been mad. He could have said the Protestants' God, and then all the Catholics would have been offended. Instead, notice what he says. What gives us the right to do this, to tell England to go away, is nature's God. Well, which God is nature's God? Well, this is what we will call a view that Jefferson held called deism. You might write this down. Deism. Jefferson was a believer in God, but his view of God was a deistic view of God. A scientific, in many ways, view of God. It said the following. God creates the world kind of like a beautiful clock that gets wound up. And then the clock is going to go ahead and wind down. And God, the Creator, steps off into a corner of the universe and leaves the clock to wind down. The laws of nature are in place. It is up to the human mind to understand what those laws are. In other words, Jefferson will argue this is the naturally right thing for us to do. Okay? So go back and look at it again. I hope as I read these lines, you go back and you look at it over and over again, it starts to make more sense. When in the course of human events, there's our word again, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature God entitle them. A decent, that's a fun word, respect to the opinions of mankind requires, another interesting word, that they should declare, there's our title, the Declaration of Independence, the causes which impel, there's another interesting word, them to the separation. Now let's outline this language. Any time in history that a people have decided to break political bands, to tell mom and dad, we've got the house now, and we are not only your separate, but we're also your equal. And the reason we get to do this is because of the laws of nature and nature's God. If you are going to do that, now we're ready to pick up with the parenthetical phrase, a decent, what does it mean to be decent? Good or bad? See, good, right? The gentlemen who write and sign the Declaration of Independence are educated gentlemen. And so they want to be decent. In other words, the argument is going to be, we could easily just pick up guns and shoot at you right away. But instead of doing that, we're going to be decent. And being decent means what? A decent respect to the opinions of mankind. Uh-oh, wait a minute. You remember what we said before? Who is to the north of the colonists? France. Who is to the south of the colonists? Spain. Both France and Spain are going to read this document. And what Jefferson wants them to do is to, when they finish reading this document, to turn to the English Parliament and say, is what he's saying true? Because if what he's saying is true, they maybe do have a beef with you. And therefore, France and Spain maybe stay out of the impending war to come. Because the colonists knew they could not fight a three-front war. 4 if you count the Native Americans. They couldn't do it. They knew that they had to have France, Spain at least partially, if not on their side, neutral. How do you do that? A decent respect to the opinions of mankind. Jefferson was aware. Lots of people are going to read this essay. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind, there's our word. We're back to the word necessary. Requires. Requires. We do not have a choice. Requires that they should declare the causes which impel them. That is to say, makes us to the separation. In other words, any time in the past that a people have decided to break away from their political superiors and to declare that they're equal and separate, it's probably not a bad idea to explain why. We got to give some reasons why we're going to do this. When in the course of human events, now to read it one more time, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth a separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinion of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. And then notice a paragraph break. And now we're going to begin. We Famous words. Hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Now these are, of course, very famous lines. What we should point out, first of all, is there's an interesting grammatical game that's being played. In English grammar, we have two parts of speech. Something, we call that a noun, don't we? Doing something, we call that, of course, the verb, the predicate. So you always got to have a subject, you always got to have a predicate. And to have good sentences, you got to have both. Something, a noun, doing something. But sometimes the thing is unclear, what I like to call fuzzy. Right? So for example, if I were to say to you, hey, will you give me that? I mean, we can play this game right now with Mr. Michael. Mr. Michael, will you please give me that? Let's do it real quick. Please give me that. See, he gives me a look like, dude, I know you're talking about a thing. Give me that. But I don't know what you're talking about. It's fuzzy. It's unclear. Right? How about this if I were to say, Mr. Fabella, isn't she amazing? What do you think she is? See, he's like, I know you're talking about a thing, in this case a female, but I don't know which one. It's unclear. It's fuzzy. See how that works? These fuzzy or unclear words in English grammar we call pronouns. Pronouns. Right? And pronouns require an antecedent. Hey, Michael, nice pen. Give me that. Now he knows that the that refers to the pen. The pen is what we call the antecedent, A-N-T-E, that which comes before. In other words, once I've told him what I'm talking about, if I were to name, for example, a female, then Mr. Fabella could tell me if he thinks that she's amazing or no. A lot will depend on who I'm talking about. That's the antecedent. What about this one? Somebody walks in our door here with a 12 gauge and says somebody's got to get jacked, and I say, we are all ready to die. Whoa, whoa, whoa! And one of you says, wait a minute, the loon might be talking for us, but I'm not going to let him talk for us. First of all, we who? Oh, no. What does we mean? All of us. Go back now to the line. Thomas Jefferson does something very fascinating. He says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Now, before he uses the pronoun we, he is supposed to provide the antecedent to the pronoun we who. Jot down in your notes. This is a pivotal moment. Jot down in your notes. Who could Jefferson be talking about? We hold these truths to be self-evident. We who? There are a number of options, aren't there? One, of course, Jefferson could be talking about him and the 3 or 4 other people who write this document. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Jefferson could be referencing the colonialists. All of the colonists, right? We colonialists hold these truths to be self-evident. But there's an interesting game that's being played here, and Jefferson is brilliant in playing it. 100 years earlier, you want this for your notes? 100 years earlier, the English had a very famous philosopher named John Locke. L-O-C-K-E. Until John Locke, honestly, the British never could really claim that they had a major gun for a philosopher. The French, Germans, Spaniards, they all had amazing philosophers. But the British, not a great philosopher. Not a philosopher that was really accepted in the world as being a true gun. John Locke was that philosopher. And 100 years earlier, John Locke had said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. He had said as much in a famous treatise on government. Jefferson decides to reference John Locke, and parliamentary English readers of this essay, they knew exactly what he was doing. Of course, finally we could say, we here means all human beings hold these truths to be self-evident. What does that mean? It gets dark at night, obvious. Everybody knows this is true. You don't have to be told it because everybody knows it. Of course, let's ask a question. If what he's about to say is so it gets dark at night, obvious, self-evident, why has he got to write this essay? Right? Jefferson engaging in a very interesting rhetorical persuasive technique where, it's kind of a bandwagon technique. Everybody knows what you're about to say, even though that's not the case. You probably used this before when you wanted to go to a party and you said, everybody's going to be there, Ma. Ma's going to let all in. This is an interesting argument, right? Okay, if everybody believes it. What is it that everybody believes? What are these truths that everybody believes? We hold these truths to be self-evident. Notice the comma, and then you've got a series of that clauses. Do you see it? I'm helping you to write this down. Do you see it? I'm hoping that you're reading as we go. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That, and there's several of these that's. That, notice this first one. All men are created equal. That's the first one. Now about these, we could of course spend a lot of time. Unfortunately, I don't have as much time as I would like to go through each one of these parentheticals in a lot of detail. But let's play a couple of games real quickly. Notice he does use the word men. So what is his view about women? Are women created equal? Yeah, Jefferson would say, yeah. Does Jefferson mean all men? No. Jefferson doesn't mean all men, does he? Of course, what does he mean? He means not even all white men, does he? He means all white men who own property. Later, though, this document and these words will come to mean all humans are created. But there has been recently, in the last 50 years, a growing number of readers of this document who ask, wait a minute, if the document originally meant just a small strata of certain men and came to include all humans, then why can't we hold these truths to be self-evident all men mean all species are created equal? And don't other species on this planet have certain kinds of understood rights as being created equal as well? If not, why not? Now that's been one of the interesting arguments that has spawned from this. Wait a minute, created equal. A number of years ago in our school district, there was a huge debate between the school board and the school district about, and individuals within our community, about whether our biology teacher should be teaching creation. The idea that God created the world and all humans, etc., as opposed to the theory of evolution. See? And I was approached to ask my opinion on this topic, and I said, I'm not going to weigh in on political views. However, I am interested to ask this question.